Chapter 27 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 27. No, rasped the lean man, and his eyes hardened like those of a cat with her claws out. "You figure it out, ma'am, in your own way, very prettily, I don't deny, but my Pisgah sight's got to be took, you bet. Guess we'll do the view in a bunch and toss fur lots." Leah smiled vaguely, because she was not sure of her ground, and required a translator badly. Jim had been abstruse on occasions, but this seafaring person spoke the shibboleth of a shifting population to excess. Never having met one of this breed before, she did not know how to handle him. Captain Strange was not a Muscovite diplomatist who would call black white, or even grey, to please her, and moreover he appeared to be extraordinarily unsympathetic in the presence of lovely woman. The magic of sex had worked weakly hitherto, and this brusque visitor gave her to understand that he was not to be cajoled into make-believe conversation. He required, and declared emphatically that he did require, an unvarnished statement of facts, to be argued exhaustively, so that he might know, as he tersely put it, where he dropped anchor. "You don't chuck orange peel my way, ma'am," said the mariner, and intended to clinch his assertion by spitting, but the sight of the carpet pulled him back to civilization. The friend of Demetrius, owner and captain of the Stormy Petrel, presented himself as a tall, small-boned man, with no superfluous flesh on his frame work, and with a jaw as hard from bullying underlings, and as blue from close shaving as were his eyes. The tint of these, added to the blackness of curling hair, combined with the racy vernacular which he flung fairly in her face, inclined Lady Jim to class him as an Irish American; but from the discourteous way in which he spoke, as they never would have spoken in dear dirty Dublin, and from his habit of interjecting slang words chosen from the domestic speech of the Five Nations, she was puzzled to fix his nationality accurately. As a matter of private history, and this she discovered later, he was entirely cosmopolitan, and, out of sheer contrariety, owed allegiance to no particular flag. Not a bad-looking freebooter, Leah decided, with his regular features and well-shaped head, and white teeth, and ruddy, clean-shaven face. But dangerous, was her second and wiser thought. She was right. The man of many lands was also of many minds, but at the back of them all lay the unalterable determination to ride roughshod over any one who would submit. As Lady Jim also held to the same theory of individualism, it was not unlikely that a brisk encounter might ensue, and for this she was quite prepared. Meantime, she decided that he was picturesque, and in his rough blue clothes, with a red necktie and barbaric gold rings in his ears, and a general air of you-be-damnedness, would have amused her as a new figure from the underworld, but that the large issues of the conversation induced seriousness. "I don't understand you, and I am sure you do not understand me," was her observation, after digesting the orange peel parable. "Let it go at that, ma'am, but I reckon I can make myself as clear as any man, living or dead, when dollars are in the pool. Now you," he shook a large brown finger, "you, ma'am, give me taffy." "What is taffy?" "What you might call sugar. Best brand, and no sand in it, anyhow. I've struck heaps of the female in my time, and it's all taffy with them, till they annex the outfit, and then y' kin go hang, I guess." He fixed her with a true quarter-deck eye. "I surmise as you're tryin' t' play Sally Waters low down. Not much, oh no. I should smile considerable to think as any gilded female got th' bulge on me. Go slow, ma'am. Make no haste when the fat's afire, says Isaiah. Beckon he knew things, did that prophet." Leah smiled again at this Wild West outburst. "You are a free child of nature, Captain Strange." "Taffy again. I'm a man, you bet. Same along as your husband." "I should think you and he would get on together extremely well," said Lady Jim, dryly. "But don't you think you could contrive to be a little less rude?" "Why, bless y', this is civil for me." "How your crew must love you!" "I'd boot 'em round the ship if they didn't," snapped Strange, very ferociously. "They've got t' love me up t' th' level of workin' their insides out, else I'd lay out every man Jack in his little wooden overcoat." "What a sweet nature you have! Are you married?" "Got a wife o' sorts," said the mariner, indifferently, "and 2 kids o' th' best." His eyes softened. "Now, ma'am, you could talk to me fur a millennium 'bout them little nippers." The last word was pure Whitechapel, and Leah wondered if that parish could claim this buccaneer. But time was too valuable to go into his private history, so she replied gently, quick to perceive that there was a flaw in his armour. "On another occasion I shall be delighted to talk nursery, Captain Strange, but the millennium has not yet arrived in Curzon Street." "Y've got me there, I don't deny," cried Strange, hardening. "Now this here racket as I've sailed 'longside's t' fix up." "It will be fixed up, as you call it, at once," said Lady Jim, sharply. "The matter is very simple." "Is it now? Lay on th' paint, ma'am." She passed over this insolence very wisely. "You were kind to that poor Mr. Garth," she explained calmly, "and besides took Dr. Demetrius to my husband in Jamaica. For these services I am willing to give you £1,000 in gold, if you like." She thought the metal might tempt him into closing with the offer, but it did not. "Shucks, ma'am, shucks! You've been talkin' paint an' putty fur th' last hour an' more. 'Tain't no good, nohow, not a bit, seein' as I'm bein' paid fur cold drawn kidnappin' of your husband, so as y' might loot a company of sorts." Leah winced at this rude blast of speech, which blew to shreds the verbal draperies with which she was trying to clothe naked and unpleasant facts. "I object to the word kidnap. Lord James went with you of his own accord." "You kin lay to that, ma'am, an' mighty spry was he in lightin' out of these gilded halls int' th' free an' wild. Kidnappin' it ain't, if y' come to th' bone, so I climbed down slick. Oh, there ain't no meanness 'bout me, ma'am. Prove me wrong, an' I go pious right along." "As you are apparently pious now, Captain Strange, there may be a chance of our arriving at an understanding." He nodded. "If as how you'll talk down to th' bedrock level o' what we've been doin', ma'am." Leah winced again, not liking to run with this ruffian in iniquitous harness. "You want £1,000?" "Well," drawled the captain, "y' might say fairer than that." "Which means that you intend to ask for what you won't get." "Huh! Guess thet'll be as right as pie when I open out." "You can open out now," said Lady Jim, coolly. Her antagonist admired this bluffing to the extent of slapping his thigh and chuckling like a blackbird over a worm. "You're a dandy one to deal with, fur sure, an' a woman at that. My word!" This was Australian. "If my missus hed been your sort, ma'am, I'd 'a been walkin' a liner as a golden barred skipper. You kin freeze on t' that, straight." Lady Jim laughed, not ill pleased. Aksakoff had paid her some such compliment, and it was interesting to see the diverse ways in which the same idea can be expressed. "Go on," said she, nodding her thanks. "Don't waste chin music, neither," mused the captain. "Wants t' git at my cards afore she shows her own." "You are in the right so far, Captain Strange." "Talks book English like print. If she ain't a queen of diamonds and hearts, I have no doubt you will be some day," interposed Leah, before he could get the word out. "But until you are, suppose you er open out. Touchin' the passage money, as you might call it, in a highfalutin way, ma'am." "Passage money for my husband?" "An' fur a double of his, as negotiated the New Jerusalem on the v'y'ge," nodded the captain, extending his long legs. "Then there's the man we planted at Funchal." "Your nephew, buried in place of Mr. Garth." "Nephew! Oh, he wasn't any relative o' mine." "Dr. Demetrius informed me that he was." "Huh! Guess he was filled up with thet idear by me. Yes, ma'am, I reckoned t' make more dollars by supplyin' a nevy as a corp. But he was a pick up, bless y', racketin' off chain, withouter friend, wife, or kid, till I helped plant him in Madeira." "Will inquiries be made about him?" she asked carelessly. "Y' make me smile some, ma'am. Why, I picked up a stray dog a purpose." "H'm," said Leah, lying back comfortably. "It would have been better for your pocket had you withheld this information until you cashed my cheque. It will make a difference." "Goin' to cut in t' th' 1,000?" asked Strange blandly. "He was not your nephew, remember," she retorted. The mariner stared and chuckled. "Donner und Blitz." "I know German, if you prefer to talk in that tongue." He recovered with another stare. "I reckon y've hed a board school eddication all along th' line. I swear in any lingo handy." "So I hear," she informed him swiftly. "But I don't stock furrin chin nohow. An' now, ma'am," he expanded his chest and puffed out his cheeks, "I'll trouble y' t' han' over $10,000." "What's that in English?" £2,000. Evidently Strange had gone to considerable trouble in calculating his blackmail. "And if you do not get it?" "Then I guess you'll be sent up." Leah laughed scornfully. "I understand. Unless I submit to extortion, you will tell this story about your supposed nephew and Mr. Garth." "I'll rip out everything," the captain assured her without flinching, "and to the nearest copper." "The last word," she observed, "was popular Cockney." "Be careful," she warned him. "Our police make capital out of rascality." The sailor choked, and his eyes bulged. Rascality?" "Blackmail, in plain English, Captain Strange." "Now, don't get me riz," Strange implored her. "I'm a holy terror with m' hair off." "Oh, we can tame wild beasts in this country." "But if I tell?" "Tell what?" "Damn!" breathed the astonished man, then almost shrieked in explanation. "Why, thet Dr. Demetrius brought Garth as a corp t' Kingston, and yanked your husband int' the Blue Mountains t' sham death. Ay, he did, y' bet. An' thet Berrin' Lord James, y' call him in your cussed fine way come aboard my barky, while the corp, as was called by his name, lighted out fur th' old country, so thet y' might run rings round a company of sorts." "How interesting! And what has it all to do with me?" "My stars!" Strange rose to stamp the more freely. "Sit down, please," said Lady Jim, sweetly. "I do not allow people of your class to show their manners in my drawing room." "It should be a prison with you in it," he raged. "What a brute you are! Because you think that I am under your thumb, you not only attempt blackmail, but add insult. I'll make things hum, I can tell y'. I'll bust up this conspiracy." "What conspiracy?" asked Leah, stubbornly. Strange made for the door with a nautical roll. "You can arsk the nearest copper. I'll give him details, never fear." "Close the door after you, please," said Lady Jim, as he wrenched it open fiercely. The captain immediately banged it again with a naughty word, and turned to behold her opening a book. "Cold drawn cheek of the most freezing style," murmured the almost stupefied man. "Oh, my country! 'Tain't no wonder he took leg bail. If I wos married to her, I'd larrup her every day, an' twice on Sundays." "Not gone yet?" inquired Leah, glancing over the top of her book. "Oh, please do. I dislike hearing an illiterate person muttering." "Lord keep me from murder!" gasped Strange piously. "Say, ma'am, ain't you afeared?" "Awfully, and as there are several policemen within call " "Bring 'em up. Bring 'em all up, right along." "I will, if you do not go away," and she reached for the bell. "Snakes! Y' must hev a card up your sleeve." "Perhaps I have." "Or y' may be bluffin'." "Perhaps I am. Don't you think it would be better if you sat down and talked pleasantly?" "If I'd a wife like you," commenced the captain, obeying, "I am quite sure you would. Bullies like you always enjoy wife beating." "I ain't a bully." He wiped his face with a flaunting red bandana handkerchief, breathing heavily. "Yes, you are, and a coward, who thought to frighten me. Now I am about to frighten you." "Huh!" Strange laughed scornfully. "There ain't man, woman, or kid kin make me sing small. Though I don't deny," he added gracefully, "as you'd make old Nick squirm." "Thanks, but I am rather tired of costermonger compliments. Come to business. You accuse me of being mixed up in a conspiracy." "Well, an' ain't it true?" "As gospel between ourselves. To the world it is a lie." "I bet you can't prove 'tis so," sneered the sailor. "Proof is not required. Denial is." "Not when I'm in the witness box." "Not when you're in the dock, you mean, my good man." Her visitor grew purple. "Me? In the dock?" he thundered. "Lower your voice, please, or I shall order my servants to turn you out. Yes, in the dock, your natural place. This conspiracy of yours." "Engineered for your little game, mind," he gasped. "Not at all. I have nothing to do with it." Her hard eyes held him as he blankly considered her astonishing impudence. "You tell me that Dr. Demetrius buried a man at Funchal in place of Mr. Garth, and then, when Mr. Garth died on board your ship, sent home his body as that of my husband. As Mr. Garth and my husband resembled one another closely, I can see how I and the family were mistaken when we beheld the substituted corpse. But I do not understand why my husband should have consented to this, no more than I understand how you dare accuse me of conspiring." "But I do. You bet, ma'am, you played low down on a company." "Where is your proof?" "You've got the dollars." She played a bold stroke. "Ignorant that the money was paid under false pretences, it shall be given back." Strange turned white and jumped up. "My share?" he cried. "I know nothing of your share. Apparently Dr. Demetrius, who happened to admire me, kidnapped my husband in order that I might think myself free to marry him. A thing," said Lady Jim with scorn, "which could never, never have occurred. It seems that my husband was taken away by you and Dr. Demetrius against his will. I shall communicate with him now that I know he is alive. Oh, I assure you, search shall be made, Captain Strange, and the money, every penny, shall be paid back to the defrauded insurance company. As for you, blackmailing hound and bully and coward, the law shall punish you." And she, daring greatly, was again about to touch the bell. Several times during this clever explanation Strange had gasped and sworn softly, almost helpless with rage, but by the time she ended his anger had cooled, and he was regarding her with profound admiration. Her astonishing boldness, her dexterous turning of facts into fiction and fiction into facts, and the unbroken nerve which she displayed when at bay, commanded his respect. Unknowingly he fell into line with M. Aksakoff, and rendered homage to superior wickedness. "Don't shoot, Colonel. I'll climb down," said he, collapsing. Lady Jim, knowing the old 'possum story, laughed and withdrew her hand, secretly relieved that he had not dared her to press the button. "Ah, now you talk reason, Captain Strange." "You bet I'm goin' to," he retorted bluntly. "Ye've played your hand fur all you're worth, and mighty prettily bluffed it is. But I guess," he swung back in his chair largely, "I guess I hold the ace." "You do?" She eyed him uneasily, for he appeared to be much cooler than she approved of. "And the ace?" "Your husband." "Jim?" Leah started forward, grasping the arms of her chair. "Huh?" grunted Strange. "I thought you gilded bummers were allays lords and ladies t' one another." "Jim?" she repeated blankly. "Jim?" "You bet. Kidnappin' wos th' word I used, and kidnappin' it is. Thet there Berrin, your husband, sailin' under false colours, come along with me to Buenos Ayres. There's no denyin' thet. But" here the freebooter winked significantly "he didn't get set ashore there. Oh no, not much, you bet. I gummed on to him as my ace till I landed stakes. He don't mind, bless y', likes th' life wonderful. We've been cavortin' round Pacific waters for months till th' dollars ran low. Then I brought th' barky nor'ard, with him under hatches, and naow" he stretched out a huge paw "ye kin pass along thet 10,000." Her brain was working so hard that she scarcely heard half the speech. At the back of it she began to see possibilities. "My husband is in England, then?" "Within reach, anyhow, and with my first mate hangin' on to him. Maybe th' barky anchors in a French port. Might be Spanish fur choice, if y' like. There's no knowin'. But he's within hail, same as them coppers of yours. The ace, ma'am, the ace. Y' might put in a day arskin' me why I let him go at $10,000. The hull shoot is worth heaps and heaps more." Leah watched his face closely. "Worth £5,000, perhaps." "Well," he drawled, equally watchful, "I shouldn't mind goin' Nap on that, all things being on the square. Now, if" "Wait, I tell you." She clasped her hands across her forehead and paced the room with slow steps, which did not betray the nervous hurry of her overwrought brain. Strange watched her as a naturalist might watch an entirely new animal. Clever and hard as he was in his bullying way, he felt instinctively that he had little chance of getting the better of this woman, unless, as he phrased it, he kept his tail up. "She's the dandiest devil I ever sot eyes on," was his admiring verdict. "Golly, what a flyer, huh?" Lady Jim, twisting her hands distressfully, strolled slowly up and down, with bent head and thoughtful looks. At times she would halt and reflect deeply. Then her face would brighten as she resumed her prowling. Sometimes she glanced at Strange, sitting like a graven image in his chair, and occasionally she peered into any near mirror, as if to seek inspiration from her own wicked eyes. For 10 minutes, amidst a petrifying silence, she behaved thus. Then, having solved part of her problem, the solution of the other part depended upon Strange's consent. She returned to face him. "Do you mind imprisonment?" she asked casually. The sailor jumped. "Goin' to begin again?" he demanded irritably. "Answer my question. Do you mind imprisonment?" "I do and I don't, accordin' to the dollars. Give it a name." "£5,000." "25,000 States currency," mused the captain. "You wish me to sample one of your gaols for that?" She nodded. "On charges of conspiracy and blackmail." Strange jumped again. "My gun, do you intend to advertise the circus?" "I intend to have my husband set free to enjoy his own. Since you have kidnapped him, you shall confess and suffer for £5,000." "Leavin' you out, ma'am?" "Oh, I had nothing to do with it, nor had my poor husband. You and Dr. Demetrius are the rascals." "Huh! And what'll y' pay the doc?" "Nothing," she said serenely. "The Russian government is paying him." "Whew!" Strange whistled with a stare. "They've got him at last." "If you mean the Russian authorities, yes." Poor chap, he wasn't bad fur a foreigner. I kind of froze on to him somehow, but this catchy biznai ain't none of mine, so let him slide." He shook his head vigorously. "Slide it is. And this new game of yours, ma'am?" Bending forward until her mouth was almost at his right ear, she explained a very pretty scheme, which would oust Lionel and restore Jim's birthright without inculpating her. Strange listened calmly, and nodded heavy approval at intervals. All the time admiration deepened in his hard eyes, but this did not prevent him bargaining. "Yes," said he, balancing his hat carefully, "it kin be done. 6,000, ain't it?" "5,000." "6," he insisted. So much was at stake that Leah yielded. She could afford to do so with 50,000 a year in prospect. "6, then, to be paid when you leave prison." "Huh! And when might that be?" "How should I know?" said Lady Jim, crossly, for the strain on her nerves was great. "Ask some lawyer." "Blackmail and conspiracy," murmured Strange, reflectively. "Sounds like a few years of oakum pickin', don't it? Not as I intend to give my opinion on these British gaols. Sing Sing's good enough for me." "What do you mean by that?" "Never you mind, ma'am. But if the dollars ain't plunked down " "They will be. Can't you trust me, ma'am?" "I guess not. You're what I call a holy terror, and no mistake. Firmingham y' said Firmingham?" He nodded. "I've nailed it." "When will you go down?" "Arter I've seen thet land shark, 'bout the kind of poppycock the bloomin' judge'll talk. Go slow, ma'am. You get along with your share, and I'll do mine. So long." Leah did not like to grasp the tarry hand extended, but out of diplomacy she was forced to touch the pitch which was defiling her. "I can depend upon you, Captain Strange." He nodded. "Y' kin let it go at thet. So long again. An' if I'd married you," he added with genuine emotion, "cuss me if I wouldn't have been runnin' the U.S.A. in the presidential chair." Leah digested this compliment at her leisure. CHAPTER XXVIII. Of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter XXVIII. After that momentous interview, Lady Jim realised the truth of Strange's scriptural quotation, although he had translated it into his own lax vernacular. Unfortunately, hearing it after the event, she could not take Isaiah's advice, and had too hastily condemned the fetish. She would have given much for the recovery of that precise peacock's feather, for having freely thrown it away, it was doubtful to her superstitious mind if the luck would hold. Certainly she had arranged judiciously for Jim's return to civilisation, and the unscrupulous captain appeared willing to earn wages as a scapegoat. But there was always the unforeseen to be reckoned with. A chance word, a chance discovery, a too minute inquiry, these might wreck the whole scheme, and she would reap a whirlwind, stormy enough to sweep her out of a social paradise into the bleak desert of sinners found out, a most uncomfortable locality. She did what she could, poor woman, to propitiate her bail. A new peacock's feather was procured, and she apologised for her want of faith. Also she experimented with the new symbol. Would a particular costume arrive at a certain hour? Would some very doubtful stock, which she held, turn honest? Would Captain Strange, after consulting a lawyer, still hold to his nefarious bargain? The test proved satisfactory, for her bail, apparently amenable to apology, worked excellently through the new semblance of his deity. The dress duly arrived within the fixed time. The shares rose rapidly, and enabled her to sell at a profit which she did not deserve. Finally, a grubby note from Strange assured her without detail that he was on his way to Firmingham. It would seem that the prospect of picking oakum for a livelihood appealed to him at the agreed price. Pending the explosion of the mine to which Strange was about to apply a match, Leah possessed her soul in patience. 3 days did she wait, and they were days of purgatory. For obvious reasons she did not return to Firmingham, but wrote to Lionel, stating that she had received a terrible shock, nature not mentioned, and intended to consult the family solicitors about the same. She thus made herself safe about the sailor's visit, in case any one might wonder why he had come to her in the first instance. And in the letter she told the truth for once, since she paid a visit to Lincoln's Inn Fields. An explanation of her errand startled the suave head of a justly celebrated legal firm. On recovering from pardonable amazement, he gave his client the full value of her 6 and 8pence. Kidnapping, explained Mr. Hall to a tearful listener, for Lady Jim thought that the circumstances demanded emotion, is not in itself a serious offence, and really applies only to persons under 14 years of age. In the case of an adult like Lord James, this sailor would be punished with maybe 2 years' imprisonment. He might even be let off with a heavy fine. Leah's face fell considerably. She would have to pay that fine, and did not relish parting with more money. How interesting, she murmured vaguely, and waited for further information. Blackmail, however, pursued the lawyer emphatically, is a very grave offence, and can be punished with 5 years' imprisonment, involving penal servitude. That would be better, agreed Lady Jim, thinking that Strange, at hard labour, would earn 1,000 a year, and have an extra 1,000 over when his term was ended. A profitable imprisonment for him, truly, she reflected, and extremely costly for her. Then again, Lady James, if the offence is committed by letter, sentence for life can be passed. Oh, he didn't write, she said hastily, and congratulated herself that Strange had not done so, since, even for so many thousands, he would not be inclined to remain a prisoner for ever. But perhaps Mr. Kaimes may receive a letter. The man hinted that he would try in that quarter, seeing that I would not yield to his extortion. You should have had him arrested. I had not my wits about me. He would have shot me had I summoned the servants. Bless me, Lady James, had he a weapon? A revolver, she replied unscrupulously. So you can see how I, a poor weak woman, was intimidated. That will add to his sentence, said Mr. Hall, upon which she wished she had checked her imagination. It would be foolish to push Strange into a corner, for as yet she could not reckon the exact power of his greed. However, she could not unsay what she had said, and nothing remained but to pray to the fetish and hope for the best. The Duke must be warned, went on Mr. Hall. Who? asked Leah, just as sharply as she had asked Colley. The new Duke. I beg your pardon, for, of course, if this story is true, Lord James is the Duke of Pentland. You doubt the story, then? Hall raised his eyebrows and shook his head. I cannot give an opinion until I have seen this man and sifted his statements. He paused and looked at her inquiringly. I presume, Lady James, that this man closely resembles your husband. What man? Oh, Garth. Yes, you may guess how closely, when the late Duke, Lord Frith, and myself were all deceived. Certainly the likeness was well known in Firmingham. There were reasons, she added with hesitation, family reasons. Oh, quite so. Mr. Hall, who knew something of the Adamite side of his late Grace, coughed away a laugh. I can see how the mistake arose, Lady James. Natural enough. Oh, dear me, natural enough. Why do you not give me my proper title? She asked haughtily. Pardon me, but the truth of this man's wild story is yet to be proved. May I ask a few needful questions? A wave of her hand signified that he might, and she had submitted to a tolerably stiff examination. Being prepared with artless answers to every question, she emerged triumphantly from the ordeal, and when in possession of her facts, Mr. Hall subscribed to the wickedness of Demetrius and Strange. A pair of villains, my dear lady. The one sinned for love, and the other from avarice. Astonishing, whither those passions lead us. Astonishing. Well, well, we must hope. I trust, for your ladyship's sake, that the story is true. So do I, wept Leah, producing her handkerchief. Not for the sake of the title or the money, dear Mr. Hall, but because my poor husband. Oh! Here she skilfully broke down for want of something to say. Pray calm yourself, Lady James. Let us hope that in a few days I shall be able to address you as the Duchess of Pentland. Give me back my husband. I ask no more, was her magnanimous reply. And while driving to Curzon Street she reflected how very magnanimous it really was, seeing that she had no wish for Jim's company. To be tied to that log again was scarcely worth the income. Besides, Jim, who had no sense of decency, would assuredly laugh his loudest at the thought of her unnecessary trouble. He would not even thank her for giving him his rights, although he must know that it was sorely against the grain for her to put up with his boring society. But in spite of Jim's probable ingratitude, she would behave as his wife, as the lenient woman she felt herself to be. Certainly her common sense recognised that he was returning from his sham grave with gifts in his hands, but of those she was the giver, and seeing that she could betray his share in the conspiracy without inculpating herself, Leah foresaw the possession of limitless power to enforce obedience. That power she resolved to utilise for the purpose of getting her own unfettered way, and all the money she required for contemplated extravagances. Also, she intended to stop Jim's illicit flirtations. Now that he was a peer of the realm, he would have to purge and live cleanly, after the fashion of one Sir John Falstaff, Knight. We owe that much to society, thought Leah, virtuously, and considered the rumoured doings of black sheep who would be cast out of the Mayfair fold were their housetops removed, that the shifting of the Curzon Street mansion tiles might also be attended with danger she did not pause to consider. On the ensuing afternoon Askew arrived to say farewell, but as circumstances were too embarrassing to permit of her taking any interest in other people's affairs, she declined to see him. Nevertheless, he urged a personal interview on the plea that he would be absent for months. She yielded very unwillingly, as her nerves clamoured for some outward sign of emotion, which by the rules of society she would be obliged to suppress. "I know I shall be horribly rude," murmured Lady Jim, when the footman left the room to introduce the visitor, "but he has brought it on himself," which excuse she considered ample for ensuing impoliteness. Askew, with mistaken consideration, entered the drawing room almost on tiptoe, and proceeded forthwith to condole with her in stage whispers. She soon put a stop to this artificial sympathy. Further reference to life beyond the grave she could not and would not stand, as she told him crisply. "Don't talk funeral unless you wish to see me wreck the room. I have had months of crying and crape and condoling." "But the sad circumstances are such that I did not wish to see you," she retorted, finishing his sentences for him as usual after her old fashion. "I feel so scratchy that I declined your visit out of sheer pity. But you would insist, so don't blame me if I am disagreeable." "You can never be disagreeable," said Askew, soothingly. "Can't I? You wait 10 minutes and see." "I think I had better go, Lady Jim." "For your own sake I think you had. Good bye." Askew still kept his seat. "I only wish to say that I am very, very sorry for your terrible loss." "Lady Frith's terrible loss, you mean. Go and see her, if you want to play the hired mourner." "Ah, poor Lady Frith!" "Now don't begin about her," snapped Leah, viciously. "But you must be sorry." "I am for myself. I have been dosed with the post mortem virtues of those 3 Kaimes men, until I feel that only wicked people are truly agreeable. I regret the Duke, who was a nice old sinner turned saint, and I lament Lord Frith for his goodness and sweetness of disposition. There!" "I never heard that Lord Frith had a sweet disposition." "He hadn't, but I'm only saying the kind of things you expect me to say." "Oh!" Askew looked shocked. "Have the bodies been found?" "I don't think so, but you can ask the executors, who look after these things. Any more questions?" "No, only I am sorry. You said that before. You are sorry. I am sorry. We are sorry. I think that conjugation exhausts the subject. Let us talk of your yacht, Mr. Askew." "She's all right," he murmured, confused. It was difficult to comprehend this woman, who so lightly dropped a family sorrow to take on a subject which he knew interested her but little. "And when do you sail? To morrow or next day? I came to say good bye." "Oh!" said Leah, carelessly. "I fancied you came to sympathise." "Well," she rose and extended her hand. "Good bye." Askew clasped her hand coldly, wondering how he ever came to love so heartless a woman. As Jim was returning in glory, and had not seen Señorita Fajardo since his reported death, Leah felt that she could safely dismiss this boy to go where he would. Besides, she was beginning to find him a bore. He took things much too seriously, and was by no means so good looking as she had imagined. All the same, after the manner of woman who wants to have her pie and eat it, she by no means approved of his readiness to depart. "You don't seem to care much," she said reproachfully, and felt quite ill used. Askew coloured boyishly. "I am not broken hearted, certainly. I do not believe that you have a heart." "You are right. It is at Rosario." "Then I advise you to go after it, lest it should get mixed up with other men's hearts." "Lola is no flirt," cried Askew, loyally. "Then she must be altogether too good for this world. Good bye. Bring Mrs. Askew to see me when you return." "I fear you would be bored with her," said he, sore and sarcastic. "Probably. Married women are not interesting, except to people like you and Jim, who persistently break the 10th commandment." "I know one married woman who has just said good bye to you and repeats it," snapped Lady Jim, seeing he was about to be rude. "Oh, very well, then, good bye," said Askew, going out in a rage with her and with himself, and so they parted. Leah returned smiling to her seat, delighted that she made him lose his temper, as by doing so she had recovered her own. It was so satisfactory to a deserted woman to think that a man whose love had cooled should go away uncomfortable. "And what a mercy he is gone," said Lady Jim, settling to read fashions. "I hope he'll stop in America with that Lola creature for the rest of his silly life. I suppose he won't turn over this page of his book of life, but tear it out." And in this she was perfectly right. He did. Towards 5 o'clock Lionel arrived. Although she had no intimation of his coming, she quite expected to see him, and was prepared to make any necessary scene. The young clergyman looked white and excited, entering the room so rapidly that the footman had hardly time to announce the title that he was losing. Lady Jim, recognising a crisis, came forward rapidly with studied emotion. "You know all," she said in a choking voice, and caught his hands. He was taken aback. "Yes, if you mean that your husband lives." "It is true, then. It is true." She tottered to the sofa and cast herself down with passionate emotion. "Say that it is true." "I think so." "But how do you know?" Leah sat up with a puzzled look. "Did you not get my letter saying that I had had a shock, and intended to consult Mr. Hall?" "Yes, but you did not explain." "I could not, seeing the position it places you in." "Never mind me. If Jim is alive, he takes the title. So this man came to you?" "He did, and tried to extort money. Because I refused, he hinted that he would buy your silence. I never thought that he would dare to go to Firmingham, but when you entered, a look told me all. But can you believe this story? It seems incredible." "The police did not think so," said Lionel, grimly. Lady Jim dropped on to the sofa again. "The police?" "Of course. This scoundrel came to Firmingham, and said that if I gave him £3,000 he would keep Jim away from England, so that I could enjoy the title. I learned the truth about this conspiracy of Dr. Demetrius, and then had Captain Strange arrested. To day a policeman brought him to London. He is in prison." "Serve him right, the brute. Did he not tell you how he threatened me?" "No. I never guessed that he had come to you." "But he did, and said that if I gave him £2,000 he would bring Jim back. Failing me, he tried you at a higher price. I should have had him arrested, Mr. Hall says, but I could not. I was bewildered, quite bewildered. It seems incredible. Oh, Lionel!" She laid her hand imploringly on his sleeve. "Surely Demetrius did not behave so vilely?" "I fear that he did. The man, as every one in London knows, was madly in love with you. I never encouraged him. Really, I didn't." "No," said Lionel, bluntly. "I do not think he was rich enough for you to encourage." "How can you think so badly of me?" "Because you are all self. You admitted that long ago. To do you justice, I think you were a good wife to Jim." "I am a good wife. Don't make me out to be the widow I am not. Of course the story must be false," she ended, helplessly. "I think not. It is too circumstantial. And, moreover, this man, who appears to be illiterate, could not invent such a tale. Plainly the Russian, who seemed to be clever, conspired to get rid of Jim, so that you might be induced to marry him." "As though I would ever do such a thing. I told you at Firmingham that I had no intention of marrying. I daresay Jim and I will come together again, and be very happy." "I hope so. I trust so," said Lionel, with solemn emphasis. "Remember, God is giving you another chance." "I made very good use of the last one," she retorted sullenly. "Jim was always to blame, and not I. I suppose this insurance money will have to be given back." "Certainly. You can hardly complain of that." seeing the income you will now receive." "Jim will, you mean. I expect he'll turn out a screw now that he is rich. Your spendthrifts are always old misers, and I don't see why you should be nasty. I'm sure I have had a miserable time." "You will have a happy one now," he said, relenting. "With Jim?" she cried derisively. "How optimistic you are! Surely I have a right to be, when God is so good to you." "God?" she echoed, vaguely, and thinking of the obliging fetish. "Oh, yes, of course. I'm awfully thankful. The insurance money would not have lasted for ever, and I might not have found so manageable a husband as Jim. Things will be jolly now." Lionel groaned. "Is that as high as you can rise?" he asked, rebukingly. "Oh, Lord, what do you want me to say?" cried Leah, with the causeless anger of the overwrought. "I can't think of pious proverbs when I am like this. What with supposed deaths and real deaths, and nothing but funerals to amuse one, I don't know if I'm on my head or my heels. There, that's vulgar, and you needn't look disgusted if it is. I feel vulgar. I could run out and howl up and down Curzon Street like a Whitechapel woman in a tantrum, and if you preach, if you oh, what fools men are!" She choked, rolled in her chair, ripped a handkerchief, and kicked away a footstool. The curate, as he was once more, saw how she tried to fight down the hysteria, and wisely refrained from speech. A single word might cause the primitive emotions to burst with volcanic force through the imposed customs of civilisation. Considering the joyful news of Jim Kaimes' resurrection, and the trouble of the attempted blackmail, it was natural that she should suddenly betray feminine weakness. She was but a woman when all was said and done. Leah would have repudiated this conclusion with scorn, as she had small regard for her sex, but a woman she was at the moment, unstrung, foolish, wild with dread that the unforeseen might happen. Lionel moved silently to the door. In a moment she was at his side, reaching him with the bound of a pantheress. "Don't be angry," she panted, laying her hand on his arm, "but you do worry me so, and if you really knew," she gasped, and bit her lip to prevent an unguarded tongue blurting out the whole. "There, there." He patted her hand, and she could have slapped him for the caress, which revealed his knowledge of her weakness. "It's all right, all right. Be calm. There, there." Oh, Lord, what tact! And so disgusted was she with the stupidity of the man that her nerves relaxed. "I say, Lionel," with an artificial laugh, "aren't you sorry for yourself?" "Not in the least," he replied promptly. "I am no Jacob, to usurp the heritage of Esau. High or low, we can all serve God in our degrees. Ask Jim to make me vicar of Firmingham." "I will, if you promise not to preach." "How would you have me earn my salary, then?" he asked humorously, and glad that she appeared more composed. "Now I advise you to lie down." "Yes," she assented submissively, "I will lie down. And you?" "I go at once to see Mr. Hall about getting Jim set free. Good bye, Duchess." And in a moment he was gone, anxious to escape further irresponsible speech. "Duchess!" echoed Leah, staring at the closed door. "Duchess!" It was all right, then, so far as Lionel was concerned, seeing that he gave her the title which Mr. Hall withheld. He at least believed in the wonderful story of Strange. With Lionel on her side, things would be bound to come out all right. Still, although the trees were thinning, she was not yet out of the wood. The green light of safety had not yet been substituted for the red danger signal. "I am aching all over," said Leah, addressing her reflection in the mirror. "There's a twist of nerves between my eyes, and I could scream the house down. But I shan't." She flung away from the glass, gripping her courage with both hands. "I'll be calm and easy in my mind till Jim comes back. When the worst is over I shall collapse. I know I shall. Till then, oh, God!" The weakness she declined to recognise broke forth in prayer. "Give me grit and pluck to fight through to the end." So she prayed, but not to the fetish. In this uplifted moment Leah felt that Lionel's deity was not a myth, but a terrible reality. Chapter 28. Chapter 29. Of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 29. Then did rumour, painted full of tongues, enter into Lady Jim's strictly private life, and depart with half-truths for the bewildering of gossips. In some marvellous way the news leaked out, as news will, despite careful caulking of the human vessels containing it. Lord James Kaimes, ran the babble, had been kidnapped by his medical attendant, who, substituting an illegal corpse for that of the husband he wished to supplant, had plotted to secure the wife. This was the tune, correct enough. Then came its variations. The hurdy-gurdy of society ground out wonderful twiddles and twists of false notes, distorting the original theme into a melody Leah herself would not have recognized. Not that she heard any of the fioritura. Prudence counselled a retreat to Firmingham, pending the home-coming of Jim, and thither very wisely she went. At this crisis of her fortunes Lady Jim felt that she required the countenance of all truly respectable people, however dull, and therefore sheltered like a maltreated chick under Hilda Frith's wing. To console the widowed and orphaned was her obvious excuse, so obvious, indeed, that she declined to make it. Thus did she escape questions about the one engrossing topic of drawing-room, club, and public-house bar. Every one from the lowest to the highest talked exhaustively, and the newspapers, cheap and costly, printed scandal with alluring recklessness. Out of London, E.C. issued halfpenny journals with lurid headings over incomplete histories of the plot, invented on unsound premises. These transparent fictions began with the Russian's snake-in-the-grass intrusion into the happy home of an attached couple, and ended with a political cry for the exclusion of such immoral aliens from the island of the blest, which is England. The more expensive small beer chronicles refused to believe that so fantastic an occurrence could have happened in these enlightened days of police courts and publicity, but nevertheless supplied middle-class breakfast tables with equally doubtful data out of which to weave romances of the minor peerage. The triangle of Dumas the younger, cried one scribe, with a fine disregard for meaning and metaphor, must never be sounded in our dear motherland. A sufficient sample this of the stuff supplied, but since the silly season prevailed when reporters, one and all, were credited with March hare madness, such incongruities were pardoned, and the public gaped to swallow full-sized camels. The clubs buzzed like hives at swarming time, for their members wondered at Jim's adventure, wondered also how so knowing a Johnny, so they put it, could allow himself to be diddled by a measly little foreign beast. All were agog for the hero's appearance, and curious friends thirsted for a first-hand account of the enforced Odyssey. Many speculated as to the probability of Jim being sobered by untoward experience into becoming a truly respectable duke, and a few made original observations anent a much-quoted leopard and his unchangeable spots. In this way was the statement that men are not born gossips contradicted, for the Eveless Edens of St. James's Street, Pall Mall, and Piccadilly resembled a village sewing class in mid-career. The drawing-rooms, as was natural, interested themselves chiefly in Leah, and chafed that she should become an unexpected duchess. Hitherto Lady Jim's skilful manoeuvring had saved her reputation, but as animals fall upon the wounded of their kind, so did the pack of hounds she had never hunted with fling itself forward, full-voiced and open-mouthed. Rejoicing women cried her sins on the house-top with surprising details. She must have encouraged Dr. Demetrius shamefully, else he never would have gone to such lengths, though Why he should do so for such a woman it was impossible to understand. They had never admired her, said the pure minded, and had always suspected her of being no better than she should be. Poor Mr. Askew, too! Had she not put an end to a family matrimonial arrangement by her arts? Had she not inveigled him to Paris in the hope that he would marry her in haste, to repent at leisure? Certainly, aware of her character before it was too late, he had sailed to the South Pole or North Pole, or to somewhere she could not follow, as she was certainly dying to do. Her vanity was insatiable. She had flirted quite indecently with Sir Billy Richardson, though he was but an infant lately breeched. Julia Hengist had only snatched her lord from the claws of this harpy by the merest, the very merest chance. And the money she wasted! Oh! Why, the bailiffs had twice and thrice been in the Curzon Street house. Also, she was so lucky at bridge that she assuredly must cheat, and it showed what a blackleg she was, that no one had ever caught her cheating. Then her dresses were ridiculous for a woman with her poor husband's income. She had ruined him completely. That was why he ran away in a dying condition. And the money had not gone to discharge lawful debts. She never paid anything. Therefore she must have spent the cash on some secret vice, which she certainly must have, since she always posed as being so very correct. She ought to be cut. She ought to be in gaol. Whipping was too good for her. Put her in a pillory and throw stones at her, and let such a creature be anathema maranatha for ever and ever and ever. Amen. But for all this throwing of stones by ladies who were without sin, Leah had her supporters in some, who must have been wicked, since they declined to condemn her wholesale on hearsay evidence. These pointed out that she had behaved admirably when Jim's supposed death had been reported. The late Marquis of Frith was himself deceived by the likeness of the corpse to his brother, though of course there were family reasons for such a likeness. Also, the old Duke had paid the Curzon Street debts, which so good a man would not have done had they been of a questionable character. And the very respectable Hengists, kind things, spoke highly of Lady Jim's patience under trying domestic difficulties caused by an unfaithful husband. Besides, Leah, poor dear persecuted woman, was now the Duchess of Pentland, and could do no wrong. She was a misunderstood angel. Hilda Frith doted on her, and every one knew how very, very particular Hilda Frith was. To decry a woman who had suffered so much, and who had so nobly borne suffering, was a crime. Worse, was a blunder, seeing that the latest Duchess would assuredly sway society to bless or damn at her good pleasure. The peerage, the immaculate peerage of Great Britain and Ireland, would stand or fall by Leah Pentland as a perfect example of what a titled woman should be. In this way raged the war of tongues, while Lionel, in Mr Hall's company, and with the assistance of Scotland Yard officials, sought for the missing prodigal. Strange, playing the game with characteristic stubbornness, refused to indicate the whereabouts of his victim's floating prison, and as the Stormy Petrel, under a new coat of paint, with readjusted rigging, and bearing a prettier but unknown name, could not be found in any shipping list, there appeared little prospect of finding the kidnapped. The telegraph wires sizzled in the air and under the sea, with messages to home and foreign ports. Bills with Jim's portrait and a most flattering description were scattered broadcast. A reward large enough to tempt Mammon himself was offered in every journal, and in many languages, and the journals themselves denounced the police authorities, who were merely mortal, poor scapegoats, for not producing a mislaid nobleman in 5 minutes. It was an enjoyable time for arm-chair critics, who, on insufficient evidence, knew exactly what should be done, and blamed the police, confronted with hard facts, for not doing it. As to the culprit, he might have been Nero, Judas Iscariot, and Captain Dreyfus rolled into one, from the obliquity which was heaped upon him. Since he refused to produce his prisoner, inquisitive people were frantic with annoyance. One enthusiast even suggested that torture should be used to make him speak. Another considered that so recalcitrant a brute should be starved into submission; a third that he should be offered a free pardon on condition that he sent back a regretted duke to his lonely wife. But Strange, chuckling over the storm he had raised, hugged his secret close. Hall, the ducal lawyer, knew what his terms were, and if Hall did not choose to accede he would have to remain without an aristocratic client. Hall, however, had no notion of losing the money with which the accession of Lord James Kaimes to a wealthy title would probably fill his pockets. Still, Strange's terms were too preposterous to consider for one moment. He had to consider them for a fortnight, all the same, and finding that they did not vary, he came down to consult Lady Jim after a lengthy interview with the Reverend Lionel Kaimes at Lambeth. Even though Jim had risen from the dead, Leah had not laid aside her mourning. Indeed, she added fresh crape to show her grief for the recent deaths, and greeted the lawyer with the air of one to whom life is a burden. And so it was to her at the moment. The funereal atmosphere of the great house, the delicacy of her position until Jim returned to tell her that all was safe, and the constant boredom of listening to Hilda's wordy lamentations, these things wore her out, and Mr. Hall noted that she looked fatigued. Natural, very natural, thought Mr. Hall, unfortunately aloud. "What is natural?" asked Leah, seeing his eyes on her. The man's parchment cheeks reddened. "I beg your pardon, Duchess. I did not intend to speak aloud. A trick of mine when I am interested. Bad habit, bad habit. I was thinking that you looked weary. Natural, very natural." "Weary!" Leah placed her elbows on the table which stood between them. "I tell you what, Mr. Hall, unless you bring my husband back soon, I shall take to drink." "My dear Duchess!" "Well, and don't men take to drink when they are worried? What better can a poor woman do than imitate the lords of creation? You are so inconsistent. What about my particular lord? Has that beast spoken out?" "No, he refuses to speak save on his own terms, which are, I may say, preposterous, extremely so." Leah thought of the price to be paid for the imprisonment Strange was now undergoing, and smiled dryly. "He is the kind of man who would ask for the sun and get it," she added as an afterthought. "Whether he gets it is for you to determine, Duchess." "Oh!" She looked at him sharply. "Am I to arbitrate?" "Quite so, quite so. A very well chosen word, arbitrate." He chuckled heartily, and adjusted his pince nez. "And the joke, Mr. Hall?" "It might almost be one, Duchess. So preposterous is the demand of this man. He refuses to reveal the whereabouts of his Grace unless prepare yourself for a surprise unless he is set free." "Now then, Duchess," Mr. Hall threw himself back in his chair, and flung open his frock coat, "is that not preposterous?" "I can't see it myself," replied Leah, coolly. "He seems to be a very sensible man." "But he ought to be punished." "I fear he would not agree with you there. Is this what you have come to see me about?" "Yes. All attempts to find the Duke have been made in vain. The resources of civilisation are exhausted. Only one thing remains, to accede to the prisoner's terms. I saw the Reverend Lionel Kaimes, and he agrees not to prosecute. Now I come to you to ask me not to prosecute." "Exactly, exactly. The man attempted to blackmail you and the Reverend Mr. Kaimes. If neither one of you will prosecute, the magistrate will be obliged to dismiss the case for want of evidence, and then Captain Strange that is his name, isn't it will send Jim back." "I question it. I question it. Once free, he may again attempt to blackmail. That is, he may refuse to surrender his prisoner without money being paid." "I do not agree with you," said Leah, mendaciously. "The man has had a fright, and will not trust himself again into the lion's mouth. Besides, even if he did try to blackmail, we could refuse, and he can't keep my husband for ever on board his dirty little boat. A prisoner who cannot be ransomed would be expensive to keep. Jim has an enormous appetite." Hall smiled at the aristocratic jest. "True, true. You put the case concisely, very concisely, I may say. The question is whether it is right to set the man free, and trust to an honour which I fear he does not possess." Leah thought for a few minutes, playing her part to perfection. "It appears that Captain Strange very wisely will not open his mouth so long as he is shut up. If set free, he promises to be amenable to reason. Of two evils I choose the least, as Mr. Kaimes has done." "That means you will not prosecute?" "Yes. Let the man go, and probably my husband will arrive within the week. How can it be done?" "Very easily. To morrow or the next day Strange can be brought before the magistrate. But as neither you nor Mr. Kaimes will appear, the charge will be dismissed." "And then?" "Then, my dear Duchess, he will vanish into the world, and we shall have to trust to the honour of an admitted blackmailer. It is really a terrible dilemma," cried the lawyer, dismally, "and forms such an evil precedent. Oh, a most deadly blow at justice, I assure you." "Not at all," contradicted Leah, coolly. "We can say that Captain Strange turned King's evidence." "But, my dear Duchess " "What's the use of talking?" she snapped impolitely. "I've told you what to do. Go and do it." "Really " "Pardon me if I am rude, but I am not fit to talk," and she hurried out of the room, glad that she had settled the matter thus. Hall departed to London, reflecting that the rudeness of the Duchess was quite explicable under the circumstances, but resenting it all the same. To punish her he had a great mind to delay the return of the Duke until his good sense, or his avarice, told him that this would be a costly price to pay for a petty revenge. In this way Captain Strange triumphed, as most people can, by simply holding his tongue. As no evidence was forthcoming when he presented himself before the magistrate, he could not be committed for trial, and after a few formalities walked out of the dingy court a free man. Hall followed him as quickly as was consistent with the dignity of a Lincoln's Inn Fields solicitor, but stepped into the open air to find his bird had flown. Nor did inquiries at the third-rate Strand Hotel result in an interview. The buccaneer, warned of possible danger, never reappeared to claim the carpet bag which held a few shirts and oddments. He disappeared, apparently into the air, as did Macbeth's fortune tellers. Hall was vexed, as he had intended Strange should be shadowed by detectives. Of this the astute sailor might have been aware, as he gave no chance to the bloodhounds of the law. "And we have to depend upon his honour about restoring the Duke," thought Hall, with anguish. It might have eased his mind had he known that the dependence was really to be placed on £6,000 being paid within a stated period. But of that he was ignorant, and Leah did not think it necessary to comfort her legal adviser in any way. Indeed, she needed comfort herself sorely, for when a week passed and Jim did not reappear, she began to think that Strange was contriving some new villainy. Perhaps he was about to put up his price, and Leah was determined not to ransom Jim at any greater sum than that she had already agreed to. The newspapers were filled with astonished paragraphs about the inexplicable conduct of the authorities in connection with Strange's acquittal, and some kind friend sent the most spiteful of these to the waiting wife. Leah did not read the opinion of cranks, set forth in inferior English, and was much more taken up with a letter from Katinka Aksakoff. It was not easy to answer such a letter, yet she would be compelled to reply. Mademoiselle Aksakoff wrote indignantly, saying that she did not believe the statements of the papers concerning the conspiracy of Constantine Demetrius. She denied that such a nobleman would act in so base a way, and reminded Leah of their conversation on the terrace at Monte Carlo. "You then said that you did not love him," complained the letter, "and insisted that he did not love you. But if he kidnapped your husband so that you might be free to marry him, he must love you, and you have lied. But I cannot believe that you would break my heart in this way, nor can I credit so honourable a man with such conduct." Katinka then went on to say that Demetrius had not been seen since he crossed to Paris. Where was he? Did Lady Jim know? If so, let her tell the writer, or else Then the epistle ended with a vague threat about hunting out Demetrius and learning the truth. "And when I do," ran the final line, "your conscience will tell you if we are to be friends or foes." This challenge, as it truly was, came from Paris, where Katinka was stopping at the Russian embassy. It had been registered to ensure delivery. A most unpleasant letter. Leah felt inclined to tear it up. But some instinct told her that Katinka Aksakoff was a persistent girl, with much obstinacy in her character. If no reply came, she would probably hasten to Firmingham for an interview, and Lady Jim did not care about having the second honeymoon of herself and her restored husband spoilt by the scene which would surely take place. After destroying several sheets of note paper, she produced a concise reply, saying as little as ever she could. Nevertheless, she was forced to say much she would have preferred left unsaid. Captain Strange, said Lady Jim's reply, declared that Demetrius had so conspired, but he had been set free and had disappeared. What he said might be true or might not. Nothing could be known for certain unless Lord James returned, and up to the date of the letter he had not put in an appearance. Demetrius certainly had come to Paris, not to see the writer, but to interview M. Aksakoff about a possible pardon. At the Henri Trois Hotel the doctor had been seized with a fit, and a Dr. Helfmann had taken charge of him. "Since then," wrote Lady Jim, "I have not seen him. However, I enclose a letter which he sent me on the day I left Paris. It would seem that he has gone to Russia." "And I hope Katinka will follow him there," said Leah, after adding a few Judas words of endearment. "Aksakoff might keep her on his Volga estate. She'll only make mischief if she comes to England. I'll warn her father of that." And she did, for M. Aksakoff received a letter which hinted that his daughter might prove to be a possible firebrand, and so the matter for the time being ended. But Jim had not yet arrived. 7 days passed, and the 8th night since the buccaneer's release closed in. Leah felt the strain terribly, and hardly ate or slept. Hilda did what she could to cheer her up, but not knowing the whole truth could do very little. Lady Jim declined to take drugs, as her last experience of these had shown her how they aged people, though that might have been her fancy. All she could do, and did do, was to keep a tight rein on her emotions, and beyond looking pale and a trifle haggard, no one could have told that she was in any way disturbed. Joan was a great comfort to her in those days of strain, and so was Lionel, with his prophecies that all would yet be well. But Leah had no one to whom she could tell the whole shocking truth, and it was desperately trying to a woman, whose nervous system was almost wrecked, to hold her tongue. These still waters were running very deep. She found a certain relief in motion, and while Hilda wept and wailed that the bodies of her dear husband and his father had never been cast ashore for Christian burial, Leah's motor car tore round the country through storm and sunshine. She would not even take a chauffeur, but engineered the machine herself. Providence, or the fetish that stood to her in place of it, watched over her escapades. She met with no accident, not even the most trivial, although in her reckless driving she did her best to reduce the car to matchwood. Like a witch on a broomstick, she flew round the country, frantic and insistent, as though she sought the enjoyment of some wizard's Sabbath. The motor flung mile after mile behind, with a buzz and a hum, and the speed of a destroyer buffeting a rough sea. Leah, with her hand on the lever, swooped down narrow lanes, spun furiously along the King's Highway, crashed through scared villages, and raced the setting sun to the verge of the astonished lands. It was the extreme danger of these flights which delighted and strengthened her, and if she had a large bill to pay for breaking every known law in the county policeman's note books, it was easy for the Duchess of Pentland to pay for such frolics. The thrill, the dash, the knowledge of power, the governance of a flying bombshell, these things were worth double, treble, quadruple the money. She was inebriated with danger, exalted by the constant nearness of death, and like a she Satan, defiantly self-sufficient, scorned both God and man. Of woman, needless to say, she took no account whatsoever. Then came one memorable night, riotously wild with wind and rain, with gleaming lamps at top speed, facing the wrath of conflicting elements, battling under a stormy sky. She drove her machine roaring up the avenue. A quick turn of the hand, and she stayed it, fuming and whirring like a live thing, before the porch. Contrary to custom, the door was open. Against the light she saw Lionel, and in a moment guessed the inevitable. Leaving the chauffeur to attend to the monster, this Mrs. Frankenstein sprang up the steps and dragged Lionel under the glare of the electric lamp. A look into his face redoubled the beat of her heart. There, sure enough, she saw what she expected to see. "Take me to him," she breathed, still retaining her grip on his arm. "But are you quite prepared? He is in the library, and " Leah flung the curate away so forcibly that he staggered against the wall. She was out of the hall, she was at the library door, she was in the library itself, and all in two quick drawn breaths. "Hullo, Leah," said a well known voice, in a well known manner. She did not answer, but stared with a bloodless face, possessed entirely by the devil of hysteria. Then she dropped without a cry or a word. Like a blood mare she had held out to the winning post, and thus paid the price of victory. CHAPTER XXX. Chapter 30 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 30. There are periods in the growth of a tree when the sap, unable to circulate freely, coagulates into knots and protuberances. Leah had heard some empirical dabbler in science say as much, and recognised it as a truthful symbol of her existence for the 12 months following Jim's return. There was certainly a knot in her life, for somehow, in an unaccountable way, things seemed to be at a standstill. Before intermeddling with criminal matters she had indulged her senses in every possible way, and now that she had receded within the legal limits of action, she was prepared to indulge them again. To her surprise they did not respond, and she discovered that the nursery stage of enjoyment had been passed. That intermezzo of fierce endeavour, of scheming and fighting, of dancing on the edge of a precipice, and of wandering in perilous ways, had ruined her for untroubled days and comfortable nights. While battling with desperate fortunes, she had detested the storm and necessary stress of the encounter. Now she longed to set her forces in array once more, and dare the worst. The salt had lost its savour, and her vitiated palate demanded pepper, red pepper, hot and biting, to flavour the good things ready for her eating at life's banquet. But Leah found, as many had done before her, that desire is better than success, that there is more zest in striving than in attaining. She had longed for ample funds, and since she possessed full control of the Pentland income, this longing was almost, but not quite, satisfied. Nevertheless, her soul was hungry still. She bought everything she fancied, and scarcely cast a look on her most costly and attractive purchases. She travelled with the luxurious surroundings of a queen, and only felt bored. She stopped at home and yawned incessantly twice round the clock. She would have willingly remunerated the inventor of a new pleasure, but, like Xerxes, she could not find so imaginative a man. It was truly lamentable to think that she should possess the moon she had cried for, only to find it was but a used up world. Jim, on the contrary, flourished healthily under his strawberry leaves, and this best of all possible world satisfaction added to his wife's exasperation. Daily he grew stouter and more plethoric. Daily he made the same stupid observations, and daily he indulged in the gross material pleasures dear to his infinitesimal soul, which was being smothered in superabundant flesh. "You are like a pig removed into a new sty," his wife scornfully informed him. "Not a bad sty," answered the Duke, looking round the room. Good enough for middle class people, but not for us, Jim. We are desperately poor as Duke and Duchess." "That's so, Leah, but you spend most of the income." "I have a right to. Don't forget what I have done for you." "You give me no chance," said her husband, bitterly. "Every time we have a row you mention things that needn't be mentioned. And after all, Leah, you got me back for your own convenience." "I'm not so sure of that. I wish now that I had kept the 30,000 which we had to pay back, and had let you remain where you were." "On board Strange's odd job steamer? It wasn't so bad, though I was chained by the leg. I learnt a lot about engines there. Used to watch 'em when she was bumping through hurricanes. They were triple expansion, too. It was fun to watch the old Scotch engineer with his hand on the throttle valve, and hear him curse when the screw leaped sky high to race like a motor. I've had worse times, much worse." He spoke with more animation than usual, and Leah sympathised with his enthusiasm. She also would have enjoyed herself on a rotten hulk with doubtful engines, and an hourly chance of going down into the great green seas. The excitement would have been intense, and the death a clean one. Perhaps Jim had forgotten the softer emotions of man when the Tramp stormed north with every rivet in her hull straining for dispersion. She wondered. "I suppose you missed Señorita Fajardo, then?" "No, curiously enough, I didn't. There was too much fun in thinkin' what would come next to bother about her. I'm a bit of a philosopher, Leah, and when I can't get cake I chew bread. Now I've got the cake I'm enjoyin' it." "And eaten too much of it. Look how stout you are getting." "Respectable men always get stout when they grow old." "You are not old." "I'm a bit elderly. Somehow I don't enjoy larks so much as I used to," mused Jim, thoughtfully. "Sign of age, I suppose. But I daresay I'll get some sort of fun out of life, and maybe will need old Jarvey Peel's money at 60. It'll be more than 30,000 by then." "Less the 6,000 you paid Strange," said his Duchess, cruelly. Jim winced. "Bit of a pull, that, eh? Nice fancy price I've had to pay for your fun, Leah." "It was to bring you back to make you a Duchess, you mean. One would think you were middle class, to hear you talk of titles in that respectful way. Who bothers about such things nowadays? I've been bored to death since Strange's blackmail turned you into a pauper duke." Her husband made a grimace at this very plain speaking. "I wish you wouldn't talk like that, Leah. Hang it, I thought you really loved me when you fainted on my return." "All acting, my good man," she assured him, annoyed by his recalling that 12-month-old weakness. "I had to impress the family somehow." "Then you don't love me?" said Jim, slowly. What a question to ask after nearly 7 years of married life! "But I'm respectable now," urged Jim, setting forth the contents of the new page he had turned over. "I don't race or bet overmuch, and never look at a pretty woman. I go to church, and sit in the Lords, and take the chair at charity dinners, and" "You do that last because you love eating. All the charity funds are spent on the victuals, and the poor get about a penny in the collected pounds. Oh, you are quite a model, Jim, and so dull." This is but a sample of the few conversations the ducal pair allowed themselves, for they did not foregather with any enthusiasm. For propriety's sake the Duke and Duchess of Pentland were seen together at the few functions they could attend during the months of mourning. Their home life was outwardly harmonious, and the crying down of a grass widow, which had been heard during those weeks of suspense following Strange's arrest, had changed to crying up, when it was seen how very correctly the new Duchess behaved. Therefore they saw one another only officially, save on rare occasions. Leah found Jim dull, as she had frankly told him, and he winced always at his wife's tongue, which had lost none of its cutting power. Even his stupid brain grasped the fact that she was changed, though in what way he could not exactly say. She was certainly restless, and his bovine contentment with things as they are could not understand this phase. Also, she was dissatisfied, although she had secured all she had wanted by almost a miracle. "Rum creatures, women," soliloquized the philosopher, sauntering to his club. "If you gave 'em the solar system to play with, they'd howl for the universe," which was a high flight for Jim to take in the way of metaphor. Leah sometimes thought that the long period of mourning might have darkened her outlook on life. She and Jim were forced by a ridiculously particular world to live quietly, and she could not indulge herself to the full. A constant succession of black dresses palled on one fond of colours, and custom forbade her filling the various ducal residences with amusing people, who in any case were almost impossible to find. Then, as Leah stated, they were really poor, considering the title. What with regiments of servants, and the stately mansions which housed them, the horses and carriages, and motors, and rents and taxes, and unnecessary personal expenditure, and equally unnecessary charities, it was truly difficult to make two aristocratic ends meet. The Duchess of Pentland had to contrive and arrange almost as much as had Lady Jim. From 2,000 a year to 25 times that amount seems a large jump, but the title nullified the value of the estates. Leah ardently prayed that the fetish would increase the incoming and decrease the outgoing, but her Baal seemed to think that it had done enough, even for so devout a woman. "Am I never going to have a good time?" wailed Leah. Later she found that the wail was unnecessary, for the fetish pitied his worshipper and granted her prayer. Coal of the best quality was found on a Welsh property of the Kaimes family, and Hall prophesied that in a year or two the ducal income would be doubled. Leah took heart at this sign of grace, as one really could manage pretty well on 100,000 a year. But £1 a minute was Leah's idea of a moderate income, and then she would have grumbled that each hour only brought her in 60 sovereigns. However, she decided to spend what she had and what was coming along from the coal to the last farthing, and arranged when the year of sorrow was ended, as it now was, to take her place in the very gayest of society. She would be presented again this season according to custom, and then would see about exhausting the most advanced pleasures of a civilisation that could not do enough for one of her greedy appetite. This she told to Lady Canvey. "That is a mistake," rejoined the sagacious octogenarian, who was a year older in body and a year younger in brain. "If you exhaust everything in this world, nothing will be left for you but to try the next. And I don't think you are quite prepared for that, my dear." "Perhaps not. I never set up for being a saint." "No, that is a pleasure you have not yet exhausted. Why not try it?" "Because I am no hypocrite. What is the use of pretending to be goody-goody when you are not? Saints are holy, not goody-goody." "It's the same thing." "It might be with you, certainly, but you are not the sort to be canonized." "Well, I don't know. A sinner is the raw material out of which a saint is manufactured. You can't be really good unless you have been really very bad." "That is useful information," said Lady Canvey, dryly, "and very encouraging to people like yourself. You might make an attempt at being Saint Leah or Saint Jezebel." "Lady Canvey!" "Oh!" The old dame chuckled. "Then you do know something of Scripture?" "Yes, but I don't quote it to annoy other people." "Your tongue is quite clever enough to do without such aid, my dear. And don't lose your temper. I'm only talking for your good." Disagreeable conversations are always prefaced by that remark. "Yes?" "I was thinking you might begin on your saintly career by endowing a church with this coal money. They build churches very cheap nowadays. You can have one of red brick, and "There are too many churches and too few worshippers," interrupted the Duchess, with a shrug. "Besides, I propose to endow myself with the coal money. I daresay I shall give £50 or so to Lionel for his paupers." "You must not ruin yourself, my dear," said Lady Canvey, with affectionate spite. "I thought that Lionel, as a married man, and the Vicar of Firmingham, had nothing to do with paupers. There are none in the parish there at least there were none in Pentland's time," she ended with emphasis. "I suppose you mean to hint that Jim is stopping his charities, and putting on the screw. Don't distress yourself, godmother. Everything is as it was, save that our tenants and villagers are more gorged, and much more impudent. Lionel doesn't appreciate the godliness of his heritage, because his parishioners pay their rents regularly, and come to church without the whip. They are so pious that his occupation is gone." "That would not suit an energetic Christian like Lionel." "It doesn't. He and Joan take pleasure trips into the Lambeth slums, and ask seedy ruffians to stay with them in the country. What with converted burglars, and wives who assure you they haven't been beaten for weeks, the place is quite a Whitechapel paradise. Lionel preaches to the ruffians, and Joan listens to the wives with whole skins. I believe they join forces to wash the children. Oh, they have rollicking times at Firmingham Vicarage, I assure you." "Very meritorious times," said Lady Canvey, reprovingly; "quite like the primitive Christian church." "Less clean, I fancy, and more ungrammatical," murmured Leah. "Don't mock, my dear. Lionel is a noble man." "I quite agree with you, and without mockery. Jim is also a noble man, in a different sense, if you will forgive the pun." "It is unworthy of your wit." "I cannot always be pyrotechnical. You need flint and steel to strike fire, and I find no flints amongst the idiots I have to entertain. Do you know, godmother," Leah stared into the fire, "I often wish that Lionel had remained the Duke." "And your husband had been really a corpse? How like you!" "Well," said the Duchess, cheerfully, "Jim might have been of some use if his what do you call those things? Oh, yes, if his vortices had combined with other elements to grow into plants, and sheep, and cows, and generally do the sort of things which vortices are supposed to do. But as a duke he is a failure." "I don't exactly know what you mean by your heathen talk of vortices," snapped Lady Canvey. "Dust we are, and unto dust shall we return." "Not Jim," protested Leah. "He would return to mud. He just looks as though he were made of sticky, clayey, stodgy mud." "It is not original to abuse your husband." "I know that, but you are too old fashioned to admire originality." Lady Canvey thumped with her stick vigorously. "Do not be so desperately sharp, Leah. You make my head ache. By the way, I have news for you about that nice boy you treated so badly." "I have treated so many nice boys badly. Billy Richardson, Algy Turner, Harry Askew " "The last. He is to be married." "I knew that a year ago. He left before Jim came home to make some Spanish creature his wife. Miss Mamie Mulrady does not sound like a Spanish name." "That girl! You don't say so!" Leah looked genuinely surprised. "I suppose Señorita Fajardo would not have him. Perhaps she is waiting for Mr. Berring." "Who is he?" "Oh, a friend of mine." She put up her muff to hide a smile. "I know that U.S.A. heiress. A nice girl, if she did not affect the Wild West of which she knows absolutely nothing. No doubt she thinks it chic to let Europeans hear the American eagle scream in the vernacular. Fancy! And to Askew. A good match for him. I suppose he will call pounds, shillings, and pence collectively dollars, now that he is brother to George Washington." "I don't think so. Mrs. Askew will probably be more English than the English." "She might easily be that, since the English are mostly aliens nowadays. Well, I must go. Good bye. I have enjoyed my hour. I always do with you, godmother. Such a clever tongue. I am not leaving you any money, my dear." "Please don't. Your grandson is finding that opera dancer expensive. Give Canvey your savings, and his lady love will dance professionally on your grave." "I am glad cats don't talk," said the old woman, addressing no one in particular. "One is quite enough." "Ah, they do talk, then," laughed Leah, and having got the last word, slipped away before Lady Canvey could rally her forces. The Duchess, well wrapped up in expensive furs, stepped into the crisp air, thinking of Askew and his triple dip into the matrimonial lucky bag. Lola Fajardo, Marjory the Fixture, and Mamie Mulrady, not to speak of herself, whom he would have married had she cared to call herself by his unpretentious name. Certainly he was a man unfettered by prejudices in love affairs. Dark or fair, tall or short, and of any nationality, he adored them all in an entirely respectable fashion, which included a ring and a parson. "Though I don't believe the silly boy knows what love is," thought Leah. Passing into Piccadilly, she was walking for exercise towards the Park. But people of that ignorant sort always seem to land on their feet, like the cats Lady Canvey spoke of. "I have landed very comfortably myself. I wonder why I can't love any one. How is it that no man can stir me into experience of the grand passion?" Lately Leah had taken to analysing herself, with fatal results. It seemed to her that she was shallow, since nothing in the world made any difference to her, or could make her feel. If Jim had dropped dead of the apoplectic fit which was waiting for him, she would merely have shrugged her shoulders. Had the old Duke come back to claim the title, she would have had small regret in surrendering it. Everything seemed trivial and dull and vulgar. A remark made by Lionel occurred vividly to her at this moment. "You will never be truly happy," he had said, "until you are truly sorrowful." It was an unintentional epigram on the vicar's part, as he was dense, like all the Kaimes family, but it was clever enough to be true. Only, and here was the hopelessness of her life, she saw no chance of becoming sorrowful in any degree, since her indifference nullified deep feelings of any sort. "I suppose I shall have to run in this society circus till I die," she thought drearily. "What a clown's destiny!" The mention of one lover naturally recalled the name of another, and by the time she passed Apsley House, thoughts of Demetrius were running in her head. Not a word had she heard of him since his enforced journey to Siberia, via Paris, Havre, and Kronstadt. Katinka Aksakoff might have supplied information, only that Katinka, for reasons which Leah guessed rather than knew, had disappeared some 9 months ago. According to Monsieur Aksakoff, she was ruralising on his Volga estates, and her health forbade an exciting life. The Duchess did not quite believe this smooth explanation, and yet at times she fancied that the diplomatist might have taken her advice regarding the shepherding of an infatuated child. It was then by one of those curious coincidences, perfectly explicable to the psychological mind, that the man himself glided to her side. He looked as tall and lean as ever, but his eyes were less direct in their gaze, and he did not seem to exercise his former self-control. Leah and he had met but rarely during the past year, owing to her retirement consequent on mourning observances, and when they did meet, each had avoided mention of that memorable afternoon in Paris. But when he crossed Leah's path thus unexpectedly, and when her head was filled with Demetrius, and with the woman Demetrius did not love, she resolved to learn the worst or the best. After greeting, she began to speak with unconventional abruptness. "Where is your daughter, Monsieur Aksakoff?" "On my Volga estate," he replied nervously, and from his averted eyes she made sure he was lying badly. "In Siberia, you mean?" He turned with a start. "How do you know that?" "I am right, then?" Aksakoff clasped and unclasped two restless hands over the knob of his cane. "I really cannot say. I do not know why you should make that observation after I have informed you of my daughter's whereabouts." "I make it because I am a woman, and being such I know that Katinka's love for that waxed moustached creature will lead her, perhaps has led her, even into Siberian wilds." Aksakoff stopped under the Achilles statue and probed her mind with his eyes. "Do you really think so?" "I do. Does my thought confirm facts?" He resumed his walk with a troubled face. "I will be frank with you, madame, since we both know that Constantine Demetrius left Paris on that afternoon en route to Siberia." "I know nothing of the sort," contradicted Leah, sharply. "Yet you have admitted that the man is in Siberia." The Duchess laughed carelessly. "All Russians go as naturally to Siberia as Cockneys to Margate. It's a kind of Bank Holiday with them, I suppose. Why not be frank with me?" "Madame, I rather think that I should ask you that question." "I never answer questions," said Leah, coolly. "It saves a lot of trouble. But I make statements, and one is that Demetrius and the woman who loves him are in Siberia." "Do you really think so?" said the diplomatist, repeating himself. "I do think so. But surely you know?" Aksakoff shook his head. "Katinka refused to marry her cousin Petrovitch after the disappearance of Demetrius. She questioned me continually about him, and showed me the letter and enclosure which you had sent. A very diplomatic letter, if I may say so. I, of course, denied that I knew anything. She appeared to be satisfied, yet 9 months ago she left my house, left this country, to rusticate on your Volga estates. That was my excuse for her disappearance, and I beg of you, madame, to accept that excuse in society, for the sake of her good name and mine." She nodded, and he went on gravely. "I confess to you, madame, that I do not know where she is. You suggest Siberia. It is possible." "I fancy so, seeing she is infatuated with the man. But how could she possibly learn that he was there?" Leah asked this question a trifle nervously, for there seemed to be something menacing in the strange behaviour of Katinka. "Very easily. You sent her the letter supposed to have been written by Constantine Demetrius in Paris." "What letter is that?" she asked obstinately. The Russian's eyes flashed. "You must know, madame, and you do know, that the letter was forged for your safety." The Duchess stopped abruptly, and became as ice in manner and speech. "You talk very strangely, Monsieur Aksakoff. My safety was never in danger, so far as I know. Your anxiety makes you indiscreet, and thinking so, I pardon the indiscretion." Aksakoff, knowing that she would continue to feign ignorance, even in the face of aggressive facts, apologised with a bow, since it mattered very little. In that forged letter, he was determined to stick to the word, was the name of Helfmann. "Dr. Helfmann," she corrected. "I gave him that degree, madame," said Aksakoff, dryly. "Helfmann is one of our secret police." "Then you had no business to introduce such a creature into my rooms," said Leah, angrily. "Pardon. The crime is 12 months old. To proceed." "Katinka knew the real business of this man, and may have learned the truth, or enough of it to make her journey to Siberia. Tomsk, yes, Tomsk." He leaned his stick on the ground, his hands on the stick, and stared vaguely at the leafless trees. "Assuredly, Tomsk. Is Dr. Demetrius there?" Aksakoff nodded vaguely. "I wish you a good day, madame," said he, and turned away abruptly without raising his hat. The omission of a usual courtesy either betrayed his absence of mind, or showed that what he truly thought of the Duchess of Pentland. Leah, having a tender conscience, chose to assign the latter reason, and resolved to cut the man if he should dare to speak to her again. "But what can you expect from the Russian bear?" she said, resuming her walk. It ended in Curzon Street. She and Jim rented the ducal residence to a wealthy American, and retained the smaller mansion on the plea that their happiest days had been spent there. This excuse was of course a lie, but every one believed it, and said how touching it was to see that a duke and a duchess could be so human. And after all, Leah really did like the cot of her humble days. It was pleasant to think that she had been Lady Jim of Curzon Street, and had taken her title in that way, just like a peer in his own right. Sometimes she regretted that she was simply a duchess, and not Lady Jim as of old. Then she had enjoyed life. Now she found it excruciatingly dull. And it was all the fault of Demetrius, who had taught her more exciting methods of passing time than by killing it. When in the drawing room she recalled the conversation with Aksakoff, and began to think that there were troublesome days ahead. If Katinka had learned the truth through Helfmann, she was assuredly hovering round Tomsk in the hope of aiding Demetrius to escape. Should she be successful, as so determined a girl might easily be, the man would return to this island of refuge, breathing out vengeance of the direst. Leah had often contemplated a possible escape, followed by a certain return, and the contemplation invariably produced a shudder. Now that there seemed to be some ground that the man who knew all and would tell all might come to England, she was conscious of rising spirits. The feeling puzzled her. "I ought to be shaking in my shoes," she reflected, "but I feel rather pleased than otherwise. I am spoilt for a life of cotton wool and policemen at every corner. Danger is the sole thing which amuses me. That must be the explanation of my feeling jolly. I expect the heroes and heroines of cheap novels feel the same when they settle to a dull marriage after pages of hair-breadth escapes." She was perfectly right. Leah Pentland was a bad woman, mainly because she had been looked after too carefully. It required upheavals to bring the possible best out of her. She had behaved unscrupulously and basely in dealing with the insurance fraud, because that was the sole adventure which had come her way. But had the adventure been heroic and noble, she would have enjoyed it quite as much, and would have struggled quite as bravely. The reckless way in which she pulled the whiskers of death when throned on her motor car was characteristic of the woman. Given danger, and she blossomed into a heroine, good or bad as circumstances served. At heart she was no vapid society woman, and her fiery pursuit of aimless pleasures merely showed her restless and masculine temperament. Danger braced her. At times, during her first taste of it, she had certainly given way from overstrained nerves, but now she was steeled to the worst that could happen, blooded to the open trail, baptized in unholy fire. If Katinka and Demetrius returned to London to give battle, she was certain, absolutely certain, that she could beat them single-handed. Katinka, she felt, was the more dangerous of the two. Well, let her come, let him come, and victory be to the self-confident. Leah was so sure of her triumph that she did not even cast a thought to her hard-worked fetish. All the same, she kept the peacock's feather constantly in her pocket. "Jim," said the Duchess that night after a tete-a-tete dinner, when the pair reached the coffee stage, "let us sell up, drop our rank, and go to Canada." The Duke stared, as well he might. "Good Lord!" "Pooh! Why do you not say damn, as I feel inclined to do?" Jim still stared with infantile blue eyes. "You say such queer things," he objected, fishing for a cigar. "I should like to do them. Oh, why wasn't I born a real live man? I should have lived, lived, lived." "Well," said Jim, stolidly clipping his weed, "you live now, don't you?" "In a satin-lined, rosewood jewel box, if you call that living." "I see what you mean," confessed the Duke, lighting up. "Same here. I was ever so much jollier aboard that dirty tramp. I slugged one of the crew, a Finn he was, a hulking Finn, who thought I was a world crawler and no man. They carried him away in bits," finished Jim, with the battle light in his blue eyes. Leah looked at him curiously. "Jim, I really believe that we might understand one another. You and I are meant to be pals, and not a conventional man and wife. If you were only a backwoodsman, I should adore you." "And do the washin' and the scrubbing and the cookin'. I fancy I see you puttin' your back into that sort of work, Leah. Honey pots are more in your line." "I am as sick of honey pots as you are. All this dressing and undressing, and court functions, and paltry pigeon shooting, and skating at Prince's on sham ice, and yachting at Cowes, and a floating hotel. Oh, Lord, how it bores me!" "You're always bored," grunted her husband, unsympathetically. "Can you wonder at it, when I have to go round and round and round in a decorated ring, like a trick pony? If I were a woman it would be satisfactory, no doubt." "Well," said Jim, obtusely, "ain't you a woman?" Leah sprang from her chair and flung out her arms with a deep chest breath. "I am a man," she announced in resonant contralto tones. "I feel like one, anyhow. Didn't some one say there was no sense in this grown up business? Well, I am like that. Up to the time you went after Lola Fajardo I did enjoy things all round, but somehow I feel as though the bottom had dropped out of creation." "Drop Lola Fajardo also, then," growled the Duke, colouring. "I never went near her." "Because you couldn't. The serpent in the bamboo, eh, Jim?" "I don't care anything for her now." Leah looked at him steadily. "I am glad of that, because you belong to me to me." "And much you think of me." "I think you are extremely selfish, and desperately weak with even ugly women, and quite a brute when you don't get your own pretty way, and, in short, you are a man, a glorious lord of creation." "Oh, drop rotting." "I am not rotting, as you delicately put it. Like myself, this sugary civilisation has spoiled you. If you had to earn your bread, I should respect you, Jim. I might even love you. Yes," she considered for a moment, "I daresay it might come to that." Jim was growing bewildered. "What does all this mean?" was his very natural interrogation. His wife bewildered him still more by acting in a way which made him gasp. She walked round the table, and, standing at his back, placed her arms around his neck. "I'll tell you, Jim. I have just found out by my very own self that you and I are cave people, pitchforked into the wrong century. We live 10,000 years too late. Just think of it, 10,000 years of life and death. Let us go back to the mud, Jim, and take up the life where we left it when you were killed, spearing that mammoth." "Leah!" His head was thrown back, and his eyes stared upward in alarm. "I know what you think, but I am as sane as you are, and 10 times cleverer. No." She loosened her arms from his neck and locked them behind her. "Look at me, Jim. Am I a doll?" The startled Duke wheeled his chair and stared at her brilliant eyes, no longer hard and cold, at her stately figure, her splendid red hair, her clearly cut face, flushed and animated. "You're a rippin' fine woman," said he, his sluggish pulses stirred. "So you think so the world thinks. Yet I have to live in a wadded box, like a wax doll. I want to get out of that box. It stifles me, chokes me. I am sick of the tents of Shem, and wish to house under those of Esau. You and I will take the privilege of rank, and be eccentric. As pals, we'll get on much better than as a Mayfair man and wife of the wrong sort, beyond the borders of this horrid civilisation that is. Buy a yacht, Jim, a tramp hulk with those triple expansion engines you told me about, and let us make for the South Seas. There's a clear path down Channel. Let us explore. Let us venture into the naked lands, and exploit the fringes of the empire. I want to live, you understand. Oh," she cried almost fiercely, "can't you understand?" "No," said Jim, truthfully, and as stolid as ever. "You have your rank to think of, and my name." The fire died out of Leah's eyes, the colour from her face, the ring from her voice. Even her figure seemed to dwindle from that of a tragedy queen into a conventional Belgravian wife. Then she laughed shortly, and in a way which Jim did not approve of in his Duchess. "I beg your pardon, Pentland," said Leah, using his title to mark the far recoil. I took you for a man. You are nothing but a society gramophone." Jim would have resented this contemptuous description, but that she gave him no time to formulate an idea in his slow thinking brain. With swift steps she left the room and ascended to her boudoir. There, after locking the door with a strength which disordered the lock, she flung herself face downward on the sofa and cried quietly, passionately, with that suppressed anger and grief and rage which rends the body and brain so terribly. Jim could not, would not understand. He was what he always had been, the sole Gadarene pig into which a devilkin had not entered. "Can I never put fire into that clay?" sobbed Leah, savagely. Only God could have done that, and she did not believe in God. But the fetish was in her pocket. End of chapter 30.